Great. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited you're here tonight for what is maybe a historic webcast, the first webcast that I know about dedicated entirely to rehabilitation and life-saving of former fighting roosters. My name is Kristen Hassen. I am the Director of Human Animal Support Services. I am also on the board of the National Animal Control Association, and I am here with my colleague Adam Leath, who is the Director of Volusia County Animal Services. And Adam, do you want to say just a few words about your background as well?
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. Yes, I sit on the board, privileged to sit on the board with Kristen Hassen on the National Animal Care and Control Association board. I also sit on the board for the Florida Animal Care and Control Association. I'm a courtesy assistant professor at the University of Florida's College of Veterinary Medicine, and really have worked on a national stage for the ASPCA's Field Investigations and Response Team doing these types of cases. I currently now sit in the director position at Volusia County Animal Services, where we also investigate and respond and handle animal cruelty cases, animal fighting cases.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. Adam and I are so thrilled that you came tonight, and we're going to be asking you some questions in the chat as we go. This is really meant to be a conversation, and so I am going to spend about 25 minutes giving some introductory comments, maybe not even that long, just to introduce you to sort of the background that I have with fighting roosters. And then Adam's going to talk a bit about his experience, and we are both have had a fair amount of experience dealing with former fighting roosters, but in very, very different ways. Adam's dealt with a number of extremely large cases, and what I'm going to talk about are primarily cases of 50 or fewer roosters. So we wanted to, Adam reached out to me after he saw I was doing this webcast, and he told me a little bit about his experience, and I asked him to join because while we come from really different places, we both agree that this is a problem and that we need to, as an industry, talk more about it. We have no good estimates on how many roosters are dying annually, but we know that some places don't even enter identification numbers into their shelters. And while some states track the numbers of roosters dying, others don't. So we don't know the scale of the problem, but we do know it's quite large. And we also know that many folks are trying more and more to not just euthanize roosters, but to save them. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this presentation I wanted to dedicate to all of the animal control officers who are out there working to save roosters, because the people primarily dealing with these situations are field services officers and animal control folks who are encountering them. And we have heard from so many animal control staff who have said, we really want to save these, or we got one or two in a fighting bust and they were immediately euthanized, and expressing that they really want to save them. So this is a quote. For those of you who are listening, I'll read it. This is from an animal control officer just a few days ago, and this is a picture of a rooster she saved. And she said, I recently received this rooster and the Department of Agriculture told me to put it down. I found testing for the bird and got a health certificate. He lived in my home for 5 months. It almost cost me my job, but because our state law says an animal in need is simply any animal in need, my boss had no choice but to accept it. After 5 months of recovering and healing, I was able to place him in a home on a farm. He's living his best life now. It all depends on how far you're willing to go and what resources are available, to be honest. And this really captures a lot of the issues that we see around fighting roosters. So a lot of the issues that are problems are articulated in this one quote. The animal welfare field has a diverse set of approaches and opinions, and no one seems to agree on what we should do with fighting roosters. Many of the organizations, we used a poster from Humane Society of the United States, focus on the need to report cockfighting or rooster fighting, but not as much on saving those roosters. So just said it should be reported as a crime, but doesn't really comment on the outcomes of the roosters themselves. These are a couple of quotes, and I won't read all of these,
But this first one is especially important because we see it echoed over and over again. This is from a MSPCA farm adoption director, and he says the kindest thing we can do for the vast majority of birds is to humanely euthanize them. The roosters cannot be rehabilitated. All we can do now is spare them the brutal and bloody fate that awaits them in the ring. Unfortunately, these animals have been selectively bred for aggression, so these animals are not able to be safely placed with other birds. And we see this a lot, and this is really, we would argue this is some mythology around what we know about fighting roosters. However, it is not untrue that in most cases, it is difficult to place large numbers of fighting roosters, but it isn't because of their selective breeding or the danger that they pose. It's really just a challenge in finding appropriate placement for them. And so these are a couple of quotes that reflect the diverse opinions. And another one, and I was sort of surprised to find this. We delved into, we did a poll asking animal control officers, do you save or euthanize fighting roosters? And the majority of people said that they do attempt to save them. They do attempt to rehome them. We were really surprised by that. So there are a lot of folks already rehoming former fighting roosters. So a few things that you should know about fighting roosters. If you haven't read about the chick shredding industry, it's just a really sad outcome of the egg industry. And what it means is that male chicks at just a couple of days old are shredded, and that is how they are disposed of and killed. And so roosters off the bat have sort of a difficult journey into this world, and many of them lose their lives before they come to adulthood. Roosters are banned in some places, and especially in urban settings, not really because of any reason other than crowing, which if you've been around a rooster at 3 a.m., you know is quite loud. Roosters are fought, not just in the US, but around the world. Rooster fighting is sometimes outlawed, sometimes not, but rooster fighting is common in many countries, not just the US. Roosters, including fighting roosters, can and do live with other roosters and can cohabitate peacefully, especially if they have enough room. Roosters are protective of their friends, and roosters often will they go and find food, and they'll point to that food, and they will show the chickens where it is, but they won't eat first. They'll actually, they actually sort of help the chickens around them, and sometimes other roosters. And so roosters are actually social animals, but they are also territorial. And so there's some misunderstandings about them. And with fighting roosters, we often hear that they cannot ever live with other roosters, which is not true. So game roosters, which are fighting roosters, are generally kept in small cages individually. They're not kept with one another, and that's because they would fight with each other. The housing conditions vary widely, and Adam can talk a little bit more about what he's seen. Some roosters are kept outdoors. Some are kept chained up to a drum or a barrel, which they can go in and out of. Some are kept indoors in indoor cages. So the conditions are kept in vary. Game rooster, there is a game rooster industry, and not all of those are fought. There's a lot of legal game rooster activity. People breed and show roosters. And in fighting busts, one of the conundrums we all have, and Adam can talk about this more too, but roosters that haven't yet been fought are often in excellent condition. They're beautiful, their feather quality is good, they look good, they're in good weight, and so they aren't typically found in some like hoarding cases in poor condition. The prices to buy a fighting rooster or a potential fighting rooster vary anywhere between $20 to $2,000 or more. And we really don't know how high that goes today, but they can be quite expensive. And rooster fighting paraphernalia, manuals, guides, it's really prevalent in popular culture. If you Google rooster fighting and go down a search, you'll find t-shirts, hats, mugs, all celebrating rooster fighting. So it's deeply embedded in our culture, even though it is done behind the scenes because it is illegal in all of the United States. And here you see, if you are watching, you can see this is a rooster with the, Adam, what are these things called?
I forget, they have a name.
The spurs, you're referring to on the legs, the combs and wattles and earlobes on the head.
I mean the metal things, because this one's
the knives and gaffs. Yeah. These are gaffs pictured here.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. So the gaffs are tied onto the leg where, and most of the time, the spur has been removed. So the spur is the thing that's naturally on the rooster's leg. That's why if you walk into a chicken yard and you see an aggressive rooster that does have spurs, you want to look out because it can actually cause some harm with those. But for fighting roosters, most of the time, those are totally removed and the gaff is attached instead, which we're going to come back to. So rooster fighting is a felony crime in more than 40 states. And most communities still automatically euthanize those roosters when they do come in, when they are confiscated, or they euthanize them at the end of whatever court case plays out. So in some places you have to hold them while a court case plays out. So the reasons given for automatic euthanasia include public safety. People worry that the roosters will hurt someone or other animals. Concerns about infectious disease, a belief that the roosters just can't be safely rehomed as pets to anyone because anyone that would want one would want to fight it, that a quote regular person wouldn't ever want to adopt one. And the idea that roosters are evidence in a crime, that they should be treated like any other evidence and they should be destroyed. So these are some of the common reasons given. And this is one example of the first rooster case that I was involved in that we tried to save the rooster. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this case in just a minute. But as you can see, this is an active fight that's happening. And so this rooster is in a holding cage. To the right of that cage is the body of a rooster. And as you can see, when one rooster dies in a fight, they're just discarded. And again, this varies. This isn't the same everywhere, but this is a common thing we see in these cases. So rooster fighting, cockfighting is a felony crime. And one of the things that we would be remiss to not point out is that many other things involving animals in related situations are not criminalized. Horse racing is a great example of something that's very normalized and is not illegal, yet we know that horse racing in almost all cases ends with the horse dying in a slaughterhouse, and that animals frequently die on the racetrack from broken legs. They're subjected to all kinds of abuse, but this is a more normalized animal sport, I would argue a blood sport that is not criminalized. So I just wanted to point out that rooster fighting is criminalized in a unique way that only dog fighting is criminalized as well. And then I mentioned before chick shredding. While it is not illegal to live shred baby chicks, it is illegal to kill the adult roosters. And so as many folks recently have pointed out, these laws are fairly loaded and they are targeted only at certain animal crimes. And that is not to say that all of these crimes aren't absolutely horrible, but it is to say that there are many ways in which animal sport and killing healthy, life-deserving animals is legal. And the way we talk about rooster fighting is unique. So when you look at a rooster fighting media, you often see a picture like this. You see the quote criminals. This is a photo of 4 men with their hands behind their back. And it's talking about them as in language that already criminalizes them. And it also talks about the birds. This is from PETA's website. But when PETA talks about the roosters, they not only talk about the people that fight them, but they also talk about how the birds are predestined. They're genetically predisposed to be aggressive and fighting animals, and that basically they're irredeemable. And also talking about the people that do this as really terrible people who commit many other crimes. And most of the time when you read about rooster fighting, you also read about other crimes that are being committed, which in some cases, as Adam will point out, is true, and in other cases isn't. But when we talk about all of this, it's important to remember that all of this is also related to other forms of crime and punishment and the way that we consider certain animal crimes. So before we get into really the tofu and potatoes of today, just a couple of things, starting point. So cockfighting is a felony crime in most states, equal to dogfighting. We really don't know how many roosters are killed this way each year. There is no regulation around how they're killed, except state by state. There are some guidelines, but those are not followed depending on where you are. So I was telling Adam before this call, in one state where I worked, roosters were put into a barrel, and then that barrel was filled with carbon monoxide. And this was the norm for euthanizing fighting roosters. The focus of this presentation is really on how to rehome fighting roosters. However, it isn't always that simple. And so we don't want anyone to walk away today feeling like, oh, this is easy, we can just save them all. There are some real complexities around this issue that we're going to talk about in a bit. And we do need to ask those hard questions, because it's in asking those that we may really start to think more deeply about how we're handling rooster fighting cases, how we may handle them differently, and how we may find better outcomes. Okay, so this is back to those pictures I showed you. This was the fight ring from this case in 2016, and you can see it's just a pen set up. And when our officers arrived on the scene, they saw many dead and injured roosters. The picture on the right is a rooster who had just fought and is back in his pen. And so these roosters, we confiscated 26 of them, and they were in various conditions. Some had been fought. So the one on the right in this picture had been fought and had suffered a lot of injuries on his face and body. The rooster on the left had not yet been fought when we got there, and so was in good condition. But when we went to the scene to get the roosters, we were able to get custody immediately. We brought them all back to the shelter and then medically evaluated them because many were injured. This rooster on the left, these roosters have been kept indoors, and we don't know if they had ever felt the sun on their back. But one of the things we noticed is when we brought them each outside to just get a better look at them, that many of the roosters would lay down, fall asleep, and it was really touching to see how much they appreciated just feeling the sun, and hopefully knowing that they were safe and going to be okay. So when we got the roosters, what we initially said, okay, we're going to euthanize them. That's just what you do when you get a rooster bus. But our team decided that we were going to try to save one or two of them. These roosters had all had their spurs removed, so they were incapable of causing harm, really. They were probably more at risk of being harmed than harming anyone. And so we said, you know, we don't know if anyone would want one of these roosters, but let's at least try. And so we started to handle them and get to know them. And this is a picture. This is the first time I ever walked a rooster on a leash and harness. They really love this activity. You can really teach a rooster to walk on a leash quite well. So we did that with them. We got to know them. Some of them were less handleable than others, but for the most part, they were pretty handleable. And they were all housed next to each other in cat kennels. And did pretty well next to each other, didn't have outward aggression towards each other in the cat kennels. And so we let the community know that we were going to make them available for adoption. And we let them know that they had been medically evaluated, that they had been handled. We showed some of these photos that I'm sharing with you. And we created a rooster meter. So we did this internally at first because we really didn't think we could save very many. And so we decided, okay, if we can even say 3, that is a big deal. Like, we will just be so happy that 3 of these roosters got out alive. But what ended up happening was really different than what we expected. We advertised that we were going to adopt these roosters out, and before we opened, there was a line of 50 or 60 waiting adopters who had come to adopt a rooster. And so the line was so long that we had to turn away almost half of the people that came to adopt one of these roosters because we just didn't have enough. We ran out of these roosters. And so these are a few pictures of the folks that adopted the roosters. And everybody came with a unique story. All of the people who came had a story about why they wanted a rooster. And they all wanted to have pet roosters. Some of them wanted a rooster to live in their flock. Some of them wanted a rooster just to be a family pet living solo. And so we adopted them all out, we microchipped them, and we sent the families home with introductory supplies, a lot of instructions about how to care for them, how to keep them separated. We turned to Vine Sanctuary, which, if you don't know Vine Sanctuary, they were the only resource available to us at this time for the protocol and how to slowly integrate roosters into the rest of your animals and family. So we sent the roosters home. They all got adopted. I don't think we euthanized one, maybe, except for one with a medical condition. And so what happened next was what really surprised us. We sent everyone home with very strict rules about not integrating the roosters for at least the first 2 months, keeping them separated, not letting them near any animals. But when we sent them home, we also asked people to please send us photos. So every one of the adopters, we said, send us photos. And for some reason, I gave them my personal email. And as soon as people got home, my inbox started to blow up. It crashed my email about 10 times. With people sending us pictures of the rooster, and lo and behold, no one had listened to our rules. No, I guess a few people had, but many people started sending us pictures like this. This is 24 hours after 2 of the roosters went home, and people were immediately integrating them into their flocks. They were sending us videos. One of the roosters, the chicks lined up under the rooster's wings, and he had his wings out, and all the little chicks were walking underneath his wings. And so it taught us a lot about kind of what we could expect from people. So there's some things we needed to know, that, you know, folks weren't always going to listen to our counseling, no surprise. And that these roosters were basically like other roosters. They were going home and they were acting relatively normally. Now, that is not to say you shouldn't use precautions. It's not to say you shouldn't encourage people to integrate roosters slowly, but you'll recall that in the beginning, I let you know that the rooster spurs, if they have been removed, those roosters are more at risk of getting killed or harmed by another rooster if they aggress towards it than they are, than the harm that would potentially be caused to other chickens and roosters. So it is still important, but also people were integrating them relatively quickly. So we really wanted to share that we had done this because we felt like it was important. When we went looking for resources and ideas and suggestions, we couldn't find anything. There was nothing out there about rehoming, just a lot about how to conduct a fight bust or how to get roosters away from someone, but nothing about rehoming them. And so we wrote a Huffington Post article that went very viral. Tons of people saw it. And then we wrote some local articles just about how we had rehomed the roosters. And after that, we started to get calls and emails from all over the country, people asking us about how to rehome, rehabilitate roosters. And so this started spreading. I repeated this a few times in other communities that I worked in. Chicago had a bust of 30 some roosters that they ended up rehoming. We started to see rescue groups pop up and talk about rehoming and rehabilitation. And so for these small scale rooster busts, what we were finding is that the word was spreading and that people were having a lot of success. And in fact, in the 6 or 7 cases we helped with immediately following this, we found in every case that there were too many rescues and adopters for the birds. And again, these are smaller cases, but they had plenty of people willing to help take the roosters. So people did want to help. So one of the first takeaways, and I think something Adam and I agree on, is that when you have these cases, getting the word out is important, even if you don't think you're going to be able to save them all. But just letting the community know the situation helps people imagine that they could be part of helping. This is another bust on the right. This is an unsuccessful case just from a couple of months ago that we worked with the Humane Society on. This was a bust of 100 and some roosters. They were confiscated. They were housed at a fairground. We were about to adopt them all out. There were no symptomatic or sick roosters. The state required us to test them. And when we tested them, they tested positive for an illness that can be benign. But also several of them tested positive for this, not all of them, that can be benign, but if it is serious, can be quite deadly to roosters and to any birds they would encounter. And so they mandated that every one of those birds was euthanized. So that is an unsuccessful bust, and that does happen with some of these cases, even if there's a will to save them. And what's interesting is we did have placement identified for, I think, all of them, but they were not allowed to be placed. So if you do get a bust or you're involved in one, the first thing that we tell people to do is evaluate the birds. And that doesn't mean necessarily do behavioral assessments. It's really hard to tell a lot. I've worked with so many roosters from so many cases, and given stress, it's like a behaviorally evaluating other animals in shelters. But you many times injuries, wounds, and illness can hide in birds. And so it's important that they're evaluated, especially if they have been fought. You want to take photos and get to know the roosters. This picture on the right is a group of roosters who had been confiscated in a cockfighting bust. And this was the farm dog who was friends with all of them and would just sort of walk around saying hi to each one of them. And none of the roosters reacted to the dog. They were just sort of like, hey, buddy. So getting to know them, taking pictures to show that they are just birds. And then you want to get the word out to the community. Now, in larger cases where you don't maybe have a chance to save 1,000 or more birds, that's going to be one story. But there's also, if you are trying to place any or all of them, that's another news release asking for help. You need to be familiar with your state and local laws, and for each state, it's different. You look at the State Department of Agriculture and find out what laws and what testing are required, and set a target date for placement. You don't want to hold on to roosters very long, and Adam will talk about how important it is to get custody of them immediately so that you aren't tied up holding them during a court case, but you don't want to hold them very long. And so getting them available, made ready, and out the door quickly is important. You can create an info sheet on the roosters, which we have one that we can share with you that just tells people a little bit about what they should expect, tells them some of the things that they should watch for, tells them how to integrate roosters into their flocks. You want to gather up supplies. We think it's really important to provide adopters with supplies for roosters, and that can include a large dog crate. You can make wooden perches pretty easily. You can also provide them with things like anti-crowing collars if they're in a more urban area. Those collars just compress the air sac so that the rooster can't crow loudly at 2 a.m. And harnesses and leashes so that people can handle their roosters and get to know them. So, and then you make them available for foster, adoption, and or rescue, depending on the comfort level of your organization and who you're planning on working with. And then once you adopt them or place them, it's really important to tell the community that you did this and that you placed them and that you were successful. And this lets people know that this is okay, the world doesn't end, and that roosters, just like every other animal we help, deserve a fighting chance if we can give them one. So when you are thinking about supplies, a large dog crate, a homemade perch is easy to make. You can find the directions online. Food and water bowls, some food for the rooster, about a week, and then recommendations for what people should buy. We learned that people do not, if they haven't had fowl before, they may not know what to feed the rooster and may try to feed it general bird seed. So you do want to provide recommendations and some starter food. The harness and leash, crowing collar, and then a registered microchip. This microchip can bring a lot of comfort level to the community. It lets the adopter know that that animal is registered to them, and it can just offer some more protection to the bird. So when you're doing the adoption counseling, you kind of have to get a sense of how much the people know. A lot of the folks who came to adopt from us were people that have had roosters their whole lives, and they knew it. You could tell they knew exactly how to handle them, how to pick them up. They knew what to feed them, and other folks are new to rooster keeping and needed more explanation. So it's helpful to get to know each person and then to show them all of those basics. before they leave if they haven't had a rooster or chicken before. Providing an email or phone number for follow-up questions and photos is a great idea, and asking people to send those updated photos and stories can really help you in future cases because you're able to show that you had success. I'm almost done. So just a few other things. So these are some of the questions that we get asked when we talk about this. One, what if roosters get put back into fighting? And we have tracked roosters over years, have not had that happen to our knowledge. Again, through microchipping and through having owner emails, we're able to check up on roosters, get follow-up photos. From that initial case, we followed everybody for some time just to hear what was happening with the roosters. And just about, let's see, this was 2016, and about 2 years ago, one of my colleagues sent me a picture of one of our roosters from that first case riding around on his owner's shoulder through downtown Austin, just taking a walk. So this is not, there's not reason to believe this. However, we do think it's important to track your roosters and where they go, because we need to show that this roosters going back into fighting is not a real threat backed up by any data. What if they're aggressive and hurt someone? Again, they can peck you, but without those spurs, they're really more at risk of getting hurt or killed by another bird. So it's important to keep them segregated if you have other roosters initially, just to protect them from that rooster if it does have spurs. What if the rooster gets sick? This is definitely something that you want to monitor, and Adam will talk a little bit more about that with the cases he's dealt with in just a minute. And what if people don't listen to our instructions? As I mentioned, they won't always. It's just important that you're there to be able to respond to a phone call, an email, an inquiry for help. What if the roosters get returned? We did not see a high return rate of roosters in any of the cases that we've done, but if they get returned, we treated them just like any other animal and just put them up for adoption again. And finally, what if no one wants to adopt a rooster? This is for smaller cases. We don't believe there's any evidence to say that you will have trouble adopting or getting to rescue roosters. With larger cases, that is more of a concern, but for those cases that are 50 and fewer, which are a lot of them, this, depending on the size of your community, you should have a fairly easy time getting them adopted. And this is one of our rooster adopters from one of the cases. All the pictures you're seeing here are real life photos from real life fighting cases. So just in conclusion for these opening comments, I think that the situation with roosters isn't simple. It's not one we're gonna solve overnight, and it involves really thinking about how we handle the birds prior to them coming into our care, how we handle them after coming into our care, and how we could kind of create a better world for them. These birds, if I learned anything in the cases I've dealt with, they're every bit as intelligent, loving, funny, and interesting as any other animal that we deal with. Roosters have big personalities, and they appreciate affection and care and kindness just as much as any animal that I've ever worked with. And while we know that there are some situations in which we can't save them all, what we hope the conversation switches to, what I hope to see the next couple of years bring, is better public awareness that these birds are euthanized in large numbers, often with no one even knowing, and more awareness that they can be adopted, they can make pets, they can live in homes, they can live in flocks, and that people can be quite successful with them. And so I think that we just need to start talking about them and started telling the stories of the birds who do get loving homes and who do provide companionship to the people that love and care for them, because there are a lot of them out there now, but sadly there are thousands and thousands of others that have no chance. So I'm really grateful to all of you for being here tonight to just kind of start this conversation, and hopefully in a year we'll be back here with many more people watching. So with that, Adam, I want to turn it over to you now to share a little bit about your experience. And we have such different experiences that I think your voice is really important to this conversation.
Well, thanks, Kristen, and good evening, everyone. So as Kristen had talked about, we had a really good conversation. You know, we sit on the NACA board together, and just as colleagues, you know, want to attend one another's trainings and sort of start collaborating as often as possible. And we started having some conversations around what this might look like on large scale cases. My background, I led field services in a municipal agency in Southern Florida for many years before joining the ASPCA. I was their regional director, where I consulted with law enforcement at the local, state, and federal levels, investigating animal crime, including cockfighting. So I had many opportunities to work on state and federal cases regarding cockfighting. So outside of those experiences, for 7 years, I was with the ASPCA before now being at Volusia County Animal Services, where we are the jurisdictional agency in the unincorporated area of Volusia that responds and investigates and ultimately charges and seizes animals regularly, and including cockfighting cases. So how many birds are we talking about is kind of where I think Kristen and I's conversation first started, and that was, well, I guess that depends. My first large-scale cockfighting case, and turned out to be the one that I collaborated with the ASPCA on at the time, was over 600 birds. We had 600 birds, 676, if my memory serves me correctly, between 2 properties. And so it became very challenging for us, even working with a large non-government organization at the time, and we started asking questions. I remember in that case, the vast majority of these birds were roosters, as most cockfighting cases are. There's a disproportionate number of roosters to hens. And so we started asking ourselves, what might this look like for some of the other birds that were there? This conversation started around, well, there were some turkeys, and there were some peafowl, and then there were some guineas, and then we started seeing some bantams, all species that are clearly not used for the purposes of fighting. So we wanted to ensure that there were appropriate outcomes, and we did find some appropriate placement. And in that case was back in 2011. But that's how it started, at least for me. And then as I started working in larger scale cases, I routinely consulted on the state cases through the Indiana State Gaming Commission, through the Ulster County Sheriff's Office. I mean, there are a number of state agencies throughout the country. Anytime that an agency was requesting assistance through the ASPCA, we were the agency that was investigating and assisting them in providing resources. So in my experience, what I observed, and in those instances, the average number of birds in those cases would range. The smallest number I can recall would be maybe 100. The largest that I was involved with was over 4,000. So depending upon where you're coming from and what resources are available, there's a dramatic difference between 100 and 4,000. So what does that look like? And I think we started asking a lot of those questions. I think just internally started asking, how can we best protect animals in these cases? We know that there's a problem. We know that we don't want to see these animals continue to go through this cycle, but positive outcomes are not always possible in these types of cases. So you'll notice that some agencies do shy away from them, and you'll notice that it's not something that's regularly taken on, even by large NGOs even today, because the outcomes are uncertain. So knowing all of that, what would I say? And I think I saw experiences by a lot of very dedicated individuals. I worked with agencies who were who had no resources. I had the opportunity of working with agencies who had a lot of resources, and I would always tell them, it's not about what you have, it's what you do with what you have. And I think many of these organizations they're doing a lot of out of the box kind of thinking, and placement of any victim of cruelty should be on our list. And I think the fact that we're having this conversation, I think fully illustrates everyone's commitment to being able to explore what the possibilities are. So I wanted to say that, and just sort of share what that experience looks like when we're talking about large scale seizures. We're first of all very concerned about the difference between possession and custody. I think unfortunately so many organizations struggle with just taking physical possession as meaning that they have legal custody, and have really caused themselves a lot of problems, and unfortunately have had to hold animals, particularly birds in these cases, for much longer periods of time than are necessary. So it's very important that legal custody is obtained either through voluntary surrender from an owner or through your jurisdictional agency. And in most states, that's a civil process, but very important that you secure that custody. And then, when we're talking about, large numbers of animals, and in this case, large flocks of birds, what are the options? What are the things you have to take into consideration? And I think, resources are always a big question. How many resources can you physically provide to hundreds, if not thousands of animals? And I think that it's very challenging to do that on a day-to-day basis when, our shelters and our capacity is oftentimes to the maximum in most days. So I think what I would ask is that you think about a couple of things. We ran into several challenges in some of the cases that I consulted with and worked on regarding, where these birds are in relationship to other hatcheries within an area. So if there's a local broiler house or there's, some type of poultry industry in that area, you're going to be moving birds that have unknown disease in and out of a community. So those were concerns that were brought up that we had to address. Those were not things that were self-initiated. These were legitimate concerns that, agencies and organizations and states, even state agencies, would ask. And I think the other concern is also removing animals from, birds from a property where there's unknown disease. So in some states, depending upon, what the conditions of the property look like, if there's a concern for zoonotic disease, things like avian influenza and salmonella and other concerns, there may be a mandate from the state veterinarian's office for disposition to happen in an expeditious manner, like right on the scene. I've seen that take place a number of occasions, and it really is not an animal welfare issue. That's truly, a state mandated act. So obviously I'm following through with those types of things. But I think, looking at what resources are available, I was very fortunate, as I said before, to work with the ASPCA, and they truly are committed to providing the care for animals in that, especially those that have been the victims of cruelty or neglect, and have a lot of resources and truly do spend those resources to do that. But when you're talking about 4,000 birds, this was a case that was in upstate New York. There was two fighting locations within the city of New York City, excuse me, and in the basements, there were the New York City Animal Cruelty Task Force was working directly with the ASPCA. We were able to develop some of those cases, and I have never in my life seen 4,000 birds across multiple scenes, and it was absolutely the most impactful thing that I've ever experienced. I think in terms of a cruelty case, sheltering animals, walking into a facility housing that many animals, and then trying to provide that level of care. And it was just truly amazing to know that they were actually able to do that and had taken those things into consideration. But at what cost? We're talking about, large sums of money. And then the question then became, all right, well, then now we're going to try to place them. We're going to work very diligently with our partners. We're going to place them. Many of the partners and many of the individuals who are willing to take them into their backyard flocks started asking very legitimate questions like Kristen brought up, which is, I want to make sure that I'm not bringing something into my flock, something that could get my flock unintentionally sick or injured or otherwise. So they wanted some tests to be done. And each and every time that tests were done on populations, it was so common to find avian influenza, Merck's disease, pox, avian influenza, I said before. It was so uncommon for us to find birds that did not have communicable virus and disease due to the fact of their living conditions. We're not talking about anything that was a fault of the organization or the responding agency. Like, these birds are housed in very unsanitary, very substandard conditions, which means that they're oftentimes immunocompromised and need intensive medical care. And I think when we're talking about manageable numbers, as Kristen's talked about before, I think for some agencies, that is probably a manageable number. I think when we're talking, in the hundreds or thousands of birds, what agency on the planet can immediately walk in and take on a task like that? But in that particular case, those birds were housed for months while legal custody was obtained. And due to the fact that diseases continued to pop up, they were unable to place any of them due to the fact that there was so many communicable virus and disease. And it wasn't from a lack of resource. It was truly a fact of a circumstance. These birds come in with an unknown background, unknown history, but very unsanitary conditions. And even despite the best of husbandry, and I mean some very imaginative ways of behaviorally enriching chickens, which was pretty cool. I will tell you, they like Cheerios. They like you to hang cabbage. They do all sorts of really cool things for some fruit. And I was amazed. I learned all sorts of things about chicken behavior, including ways of, low stress handling and ways to, calm them while housing. I mean, just unbelievable resources. But unfortunately, even in that situation, despite providing even all of that best of care, the outcome was the same. So, I only mention that because, in all of my time working on the national stage and at the local level, I have not had the luxury on a rare occasion to have small scale cases. Unfortunately, we so often, most of our cases, the last several that we've had even here, have been in hundreds of birds. So it's very challenging for us, to be thinking about, how do we place any or some? And I think, you start small, just as Kristen said before, you set small goals. And even some of our own staff members said, well, I have some family members who have a farm. They don't have any animals. They would be willing to take a chicken or a hen or a rooster. Might you consider the options of hens and roosters the same or separately? These are questions that you're going to have to ask yourself. And when it comes to the ultimate decision, make sure that you're backing up your decisions with science. Make sure that you're backing up your decisions with independent opinions of both avian experts and veterinarians and your state veterinarian's office, because it's going to be different for each of you. But I think it's very important that you, in collaborating with all those individuals, that you're able to get a more holistic response. And when it comes to euthanasia, I was describing to Kristen earlier, we in our organization, we practice sodium pentobarbital injection. And I know there was a question about how that happens and what we do. We use the same protocol for domestic dogs and cats as we do for avian species. And we certainly go through the same process of their care and their humane euthanasia, if that is the decision that is ultimately arrived at, with the same care and dignity as we would with any other species. So I definitely think it's important for those individuals who are in field positions, who know that they're going to be, or there's a chance you could be, or you're investigating one right now and think that you're about to have to respond to these types of things. You have to be asking yourself some tough questions earlier on. And that is, I will have better options if I start planning now. Where am I going to bring them? What resources are available? Who's available at my disposal? Who can I collaborate with? What resources do I have locally, and what resources are available nationally? I would always encourage individuals to reach out to their network. And if you're unsure about what that looks like, HAAS is a really great support system. NACA is a really great resource for you, as well as additional resources on the subject with a lot of large NGOs. The ASPCA has a great program where they can also provide resources on a national level. But I think it's important that you start asking yourself those questions, preparing earlier, where to bring the birds, how to house them, and, getting a realistic time frame. If your process for petitioning for custody is 30 days, then prepare that you're going to be housing these birds with, common husbandry practices and attending to the care that they need medically and behaviorally for a minimum of 30 days. What does those resources look like? Can you ask the public for help? Might there be a way that you can partner with your local fairgrounds? Could you partner with other state agencies or your animal control agency or your local nonprofit organizations? So asking those just sort of questions earlier on will just mean that you're likely to get access to the resources that you need when you truly need them. But again, I wanted to thank each and every one of you. This is tough work. This is not an easy decision each and every day, regardless of the number of animals. The impact felt by the individual animal is the same, whether it's a single animal or hundreds of animals, or in the worst case scenario, even more. The impact of those animals are all the same. And I think it's important that we as animal welfare professionals, our job is to objectively document, describe, and tell the story of what we see. So that later becomes important and information that we can use in telling their story, whatever path that takes, through our justice system or through humane disposition. We need to be out there, and it's a difficult job. So I appreciate and commend you all for the difficult work that you do every day. And if I can be a resource, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on the NACA website. My email address is on there as well. I'd love to be a resource. If I can be of assistance to you, please don't hesitate to let me know. And thank you to Kristen and Haas for the opportunity.
Adam, I'm so glad you're here. And when you reached out, I thought it would have been easy to come here tonight and just sort of tell people, here's how you rehome roosters and it's all fine and it's all good. But this problem, it feels to me like we're really just beginning to tackle it as an industry. Like we haven't really, it's just been kind of this like dirty work that we've been like, this is horrifying. We have a responsibility to get the birds out of this situation, but there really aren't great solutions. And do you think like the next step is just that we keep talking about it, talking about our different experiences, figuring out things that work, figuring out what the hell you do when you get 3,000 roosters? Like, do you think we just have some kind of problem solving work ahead when it comes to fighting roosters?
I think it's a challenge because, I think some would argue that with the unknown outcomes, or I have an argument that's oftentimes thrown at me, especially when we're doing jury prep. I was doing a depo just the other day and I was asked by an attorney, well, hell, we eat fried chicken every day. Why does it matter? Kind of response. And so, trying to professionally respond to, an attorney who's asking this question, much less, the general public, it really frames the context by which we need to explain the story of what this is to a much larger audience. So what I feel like is really a two-pronged approach. I feel like we need to be responding to these cases, whether individual agencies decide to accept the responsibility when that's a manageable number, like what Kristen is talking about, or they choose to ignore it and it becomes an unmanageable number over years and then more animals suffer. I think it's important that the jurisdiction whose responsibility it is to do enforcement aggressively respond, investigate, and enforce when necessary. And I think that will arrest the continued cycle of additional birds continuing to perpetuate, at least in those particular individuals. But I think there's so many out there that we don't know about. But in terms of how we can deal with the issue, I really feel like providing resources. I think having the framework, this particular conversation around how we can help one another is truly the conversation we need to be having. But I think responding when there's a need, investigating and responding to those, and then I think on top of that, we need to be comfortable in publishing some data. We need to be comfortable in saying, here's what we did in this particular case, here's what happened, and here was the outcome. Most wildlife species and farm animals are not always counted in intake. They're typically in the other category in a shelter admin. So those are not necessarily always counted toward live release. And so, those are not always individually numbered. So I think, we should feel comfortable in having conversations around, here's what the outcome was for these animals, because these are the resources we had to provide. And these were the outcomes. If you want a different outcome, we would encourage your participation, and here's how you can help.
Adam, we're almost out of time, and Joel has a question I want to get to. But before that, I just want to ask you, one of the best resources that I found was actually in Arizona. We started working with some folks who were in the legal game bird kind of show business. And they were actually really helpful at evaluating the birds, at assessing them, at medically quarantining them. Do you think we as an industry need to think about kind of maybe, non-traditional partnerships like that, where we actually find people with some subject matter expertise who are not fighting the birds?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because the Game Fowl Breeders Association has, long since also had ties to the industry. And so I think having
oh, interesting.
them, those standards were created around, birds involved in fighting. They will say at this point that they're not a proponent and are not advocating for that to take place at all. Yet many of the cases that we've investigated, individuals claim to have been involved as a way to legitimize illegal activity. So I oftentimes question, those types of things, but I think it's always important for us to have people at the table. I think we all need to be learning from each other, even from those that may have a differing viewpoint, because I think it allows us to explore the topic in greater detail and cover more angles.
Yeah, I just think there's so few answers. And to your point, data is really critical. And I really appreciate Joel saying they had a case of 7,000 roosters. Like, we need to start really getting a hold on this problem nationally and what the real numbers are, because we just don't have a real sense. And Jill asked what the largest placement case that you're aware of them getting placed is. And I think for me, that would be a case in Chicago where they placed 50 plus, but I know there have been bigger placements than that. I'm just not really, I wasn't directly involved in them. Did the ASPCA have any successful placement cases?
Yes, the ASPCA works very diligently for placement, and in terms of what the success was, we were able to talk about that more, I think, with dogfighting in terms of successful rehabilitation. But on smaller scale cases, small numbers of their birds, they were able to work through placement. I would not venture to guess a percentage. It certainly wouldn't be a very high percentage, but it is something that I think we need to continue to explore and have the conversation about, because I don't know that enough is known about what the landscape is.
In closing, I guess the thing that you and I agree on, one of the many things that we agree on, is that the roosters themselves, they don't need to be killed for their own good. They don't need to be euthanized for their own good. Like for the most part, the roosters that I have met, and then not all, but very many, have been rehabilitatable. They have been animals that could live with someone. But to your point, the outcome options are extremely limited beyond small numbers. And so I guess that I hope folks walk away with not giving up on really seeing that these are animals just like every other animal. There's nothing about them that's inherently bad or evil. They're just animals and they need our help. And right now we don't have a really good way to help them on a large scale. Do you think that's right?
I do. I think what we have to recognize is that we didn't create the problem, but we are the ones who are tasked within so many levels with finding the solution. And I think these birds are a vehicle for continued, illegal activity. And I think it's, it is a little challenging when they are not only utilized to continue the illegal activity, but I feel like that in many situations, they really struggle. I think organizations really struggle with the placement of those birds, and I think they're right to struggle. There's so many challenges that exist out there now, and they're right to struggle. I think we're trying to deal with a solution to a man-made problem. I mean, the reality is these birds are exploited. Their natural behavior is exploited to perform in this way. So we're working to find a solution, and thank you all out there who are reporting to work every day and trying to find those positive outcomes.
Yeah, thank you to those of you who are trying. And to Vine Sanctuary, I want to thank you, because Vine Sanctuary is one of the first organizations to give other groups some hope that there was even a possible live outcome option. And to all of you who've saved a rooster, or hundreds of them, thank you. I hope that I really do hope the next year we're sitting here having the next version of this conversation together. And we hope that you'll reach out to Adam and I. You can do that through NACA, the Human Animal Support Services Project. You can get right to us there at either of those websites, and I'll put we'll send you my email and Adam's email after this. But we don't have all the answers, but we really appreciate you being here to talk about it, because it's the beginning of hopefully making things better for our rooster friends. So thanks everyone for attending. Adam, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us your experience. And we will make this recording will be available to share, and please share it with others. And we hope that if you have experiences to share with us, we want to hear those too. So thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great evening. Stay safe.